Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Daniel Davis's Deep Dive. On this episode, we're going to talk about something else that's going on that you need more information on, something else that the media doesn't give you a lot of information on that you might not even know the questions to ask, but are things that you need to know. Because especially when you're talking about something like war and peace and this war in Ukraine between Ukraine and Russia, and as we start talking about, heading in now to the second half of the second year of this war, we have to start asking questions like, okay, we haven't seen a lot of success here. We haven't seen a lot of bang for our buck. We haven't seen the needle move at all from all the things that we've given. And so the question needs to be asked, is this a good investment of our money? Do we need to keep doing this, or should we change and do something different? That's one of the things that Deep Dive does for you, that we provide for you the kind of information on the headline issues that you see that actually tell you whether or not you want to make that investment, whether or not you think it's a good idea for the United States. What we're going to specifically look at today, something that happened earlier, actually this very afternoon, it was announced from the White House that the United States now actually, for the first time in many months, that Ukraine has been asking for the long-range missile systems. It's called ATACMS. It's an acronym that stands for various things, but bottom line is it's the long-range missiles up to, it has various warheads on this missile system. It can go out to 300 kilometers, which is somewhere around 200 miles, depending on the payload and the warhead that's involved there. So it's got quite long range. And it has everywhere from these cluster munitions that can send a long way. It can hit troop concentrations. Some of the other variants have high explosive warheads with very heavy warheads that can cause significant point damage to large facilities or other command centers, et cetera. So it's something that can really reach out long. Now, the United States has not sent it up to this point because there's some concern that it could be used to fire into Russia proper, and that could potentially expand the war and cause Russia to try to retaliate against either NATO or the United States in particular. But like so many other things that the president has done throughout this entire war, is after being begged over and over and over, then finally he ends up relenting. And according to this news report that just was announced on MSNBC, apparently that has finally happened.
Just learning, according to NBC News, citing 3 U.S. officials and a congressional official familiar with the discussions, that yesterday President Biden informed President Zelensky that the U.S. does plan to provide a small number of ATACMS, those long-range guided missiles that Ukraine had been asking for. Still, the officials caution that it's not clear exactly how many ATACMS the U.S. plans to provide, or exactly when they will be delivered, or even when it will be announced. But the officials did say that the president made it clear to Zelensky that will happen some point in the future. Now, my colleague Courtney Kube has been speaking with officials at the Pentagon, and they say that there had been some concern about the stockpile of ATACMS here in the U.S., and also they had also talked about whether use of ATACMS in places like Crimea might end up provoking Putin. But at this point, they have found a small number, again, we stress a small number of ATACMS that the U.S. does plan to provide Ukraine.
Now, there's several important things that the reporter mentioned there that you need to understand. So first of all, we had the same kind of a situation that we had in one of our earlier episodes where we played some clips by Senator Josh Hawley, where he asked a really important question, which is, what's the strategy? What's our plan? So if the president is going to now add a new capability from the U.S. inventory, the question needs to be answered: for what? Towards what end? What is it you expect the addition of this new capacity to do to the offensive? Is this going to elevate the Ukraine side to allow them to do something now to succeed on the battlefield when before they couldn't? Or what's the intent? How many of these things do you plan on getting? Over what period of time? Those should be basic questions that should be asked. But you can tell both from the reporter there, as well as any reports that have come out since, that those questions aren't even being asked. And my guess is they're not even being considered. I don't know that anyone in the White House is thinking about what this is going to do. I think that they perhaps just got tired of Zelensky asking all the time, and so now they went ahead and they just finally gave it to him, because frankly, that's been the pattern for this administration throughout the duration. The Zelensky regime asked for many things over and over and over. The U.S. says no at first. We're no to the F-16s. It was no to even to offensive weapons in the beginning. No to ATACMS. At first, it was no to even HIMARS. no to air defense, Patriot systems, and then eventually all of those things went down. So this is actually the last thing on the list that Ukraine had asked for that now then the administration says they're going to give. And many of the Abrams tanks that we have previously offered are apparently about ready to start showing up on the battlefield here. And look, I asked the same question about those tanks before, and let me make sure everybody's very clear on this. As someone who was in an M1 tank unit, who have fought in combat with them and who helped train them in the U.S. 1st Armored Division, I can tell you 31 Abrams tanks are not going to change anything in any war, period. That's a single battalion's worth of armor, and in the hands of somebody who really knows how to use it, the well-trained, experienced Americans who are very well versed in the operation of the vehicle and the fire control systems and all that. They're not going to be able to do a whole lot with a single battalion. When you're talking about, you have to incorporate that into a combined arms offensive by themselves, and with somebody who's frankly only marginally capable of doing this, because it's just not fair to ask anybody to be able to do, to become an expert on something when they're under fire and they're doing it on a rapid scale. Nobody can do that and do it well. And so the chances of this actually making a tactical impact is probably pretty low. What you're going to probably see these Abrams do is you're going to see them, they're going to show up on fire on the battlefield at some point, and they're going to be used as basically an infantry fire support weapon, not like the breakthrough that we used them for in Desert Storm and in Iraq in 2003 and in our doctrine that we stand for. You're not going to see them used that way because the Ukrainians don't have the capacity, and I don't mean the mental capacity. They're as smart as anybody. They don't have the infrastructure and the things that go along with that also were necessary, like air power, artillery, engineer support, communication support, flank unit support, all those other things combined. They don't have hardly any of those things that are necessary to use the tanks in a big way. So you're not going to see a big tank. The reporter also specified on this ATACMS thing that it's going to be a small number. Now, that's also important because he did mention that Courtney Kube said, hey, the Pentagon officials are a little bit concerned because we don't have that many ATACMS for our own inventory. And some reports that I saw that were, I think, as of January of this year, that there was a total of about 2,200 missiles in the U.S. inventory completely, total. That's all that we had. One can only assume that we've had more produced since that time, but it's not a real high rate of production. So it's probably not a whole lot more than that. So we're only going to be able to give them a small number anyway. And just so people understand, the ATACMS missile system is very similar in targeting and everything else to the HIMARS system that we give the Ukraine side already. And the Russian side has figured out a lot of ways to help defeat those systems. So the guidance system on the HIMARS and on the ATACMS have a lot of similarities, and some of the electronic warfare systems that the Russians have that worked on the HIMARS are probably also going to work on the ATACMS. We won't know until that gets out there. Perhaps the U.S. has made some software adjustments. One hopes so. But the bottom line is there's not going to be very many of them we're going to give. And the question is that I hope the administration is at least answering to the Pentagon, how many of our own inventory are you going to give up? And what is Ukraine going to do once those few missiles have been exhausted? So you see, any way you want to shape it up, this is not going to have almost any impact on the battlefield. So the question is, if this is not going to change the dynamics, then why do you want to add it when there is the risk that Ukraine decides, regardless of what we've asked them not to do, that they end up using it to fire and hitting some Russian target, possibly in the Russia proper, or hit something else in the depth that could cause some escalation. So there's some risk with that. And we've seen throughout this entire war that so far, none of the things that we've given have resulted in that. And maybe this doesn't either. But we are taking some risk that happens at some point, but it won't really add anything that's going to help the Ukraine side win their war. So I'm not really sure what we're trying to accomplish here. And it just is another troubling data point. And one of my concerns, it's been throughout, that the administration doesn't know what it wants to do. They don't know what they want to accomplish. They don't know what right looks like, to put it in a different way. And until the administration really gets a good handle on what the outcome is they desire, what is the end state that you seek to accomplish, only then can you know whether this weapon system makes sense, or whether 500 missiles make sense, or 1,000 missiles, or 20 missiles. You don't have any idea if you don't even know what you're trying to accomplish. And that's one of the biggest things that I think the United States needs to really, wrestle with and figure out for themselves, for the government, so that we know whether what we're doing makes any sense or not. And as Americans, as us, especially when we're talking to our legislators, or even as some of our legislators, those are questions that we need answers to before we know if we want to authorize any more of this. Senator Hawley said yesterday that he was told by the administration that they wanted, apparently in the next year or so, not $24 billion, but another $100 billion. And he asked the right question: what do you want to do with this? What is the objective? What is the strategy? And apparently he wasn't given one at the time other than to keep a stalemate. And then we have to decide, is that a good use of American money? Is it good to risk our own potential security, that if we get into a war somewhere, that now we don't have as many ATACMS missiles to use because these things are very low rate production. It'll take a long time, years probably, to get them ramped up. So those are questions that we need to be asking before we need to decide as the American people, do we want our government spending our money and our limited resources on something that's not going to make a difference in this war and could impinge on our own ability should we get into a war? I think my view on that point is that we should not. It's a waste of our assets and our resources. It's not helping the other side there, but it is diminishing our capacity, and that's not a good idea. That's not a good use of American money. Why should we spend money to make ourselves weaker? I'm out on that, and I bet you are too. Anyway, we'll see what happens on the next one. We'll see where this goes, and I guarantee you we'll be right here to tell you what's happening and telling you the things you need to know on the next deep dive. And that's it for today.